Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. The government has maintained its borrowing plan for the second half of FY20 despite the corporate tax rate cuts. It will borrow 2.68 lakh crore rupees during this period. The much talked about dollar sovereign bond issuance will not take place this year. India's fiscal deficit for April to August period widened marginally. The figure stood at 78.7% of the budgeted estimates for the full year, compared to 77.8% in the previous month. And the former MD of Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank has confessed that the overdrawals to the Widwan family and the HDI group were done as per his instructions. Now, India has cut the price of natural gas effective today and till March 2020. This is the first cut in prices after 4 straight hikes since October of last year. And finally, Shiv Sena leader Aaditya Thackeray will contest the Maharashtra Assembly polls from the Worli constituency. He made the announcement at a party rally on Monday. Let's begin with the action on Wall Street, where stocks finished higher in the final trading session of the month and the quarter, in fact, after Trump administration officials played down or disputed reports that Washington was weighing plans to impede U.S. investments in Chinese companies, soothing a fear that had put equities under pressure at the end of last week. Renita Young of Bloomberg News sums it all up in this report.
U.S. markets ended higher on Monday, with the S&P 500 seeing its third straight monthly increase, all happening as trade tensions appear to be easing between the United States and China, and investors were willing to take on a little bit more risk. Now, this is also the last trading day of the quarter and of the month, as investors do end of the month and end of the quarter positioning. Now, during the session, we saw quite a bit of company news. WeWork officially withdrawing its IPO prospectus, and as a result, WeWork bonds tanked, and earnings this week include Stitch Fix, Lennar, and Bed Bath & Beyond, which saw a rise during the session, by the way, after Wedbush increased its price target and rating on Bed Bath & Beyond. Now, we also saw gold dropping at around 1.5% as risk was back on during the session, and there wasn't a huge need for a safe haven, and crude oil continues to fall farther from the point where it reached after the attacks on Saudi Arabian oil production. And by the way, Saudi Aramco says that production has now been fully restored and is in fact a little bit better than before those unprecedented attacks. The Bloomberg Dollar Index hit a new intraday high, and on Tuesday, ISM manufacturing data comes. Thursday, ISM non-manufacturing data, and on Friday, the September jobs report will be in. And that's a look at your Monday Wall Street action. In New York, I'm Renita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, let's also look at the Asian markets, at least the ones that are open. Paul Allen of Bloomberg News is joining me live from Sydney. Good morning, Paul. What can you tell us about the new quarter? In fact, are you seeing anything that we can take for the next couple of weeks?
Well, it's looking like it's very much risk on for today, at least. You did point out markets that are open. Of course, Chinese markets are closed today for the 70th anniversary celebrations of the People's Republic. But yeah, we are seeing gains at the moment following US equities higher. Here in Australia, we've got the ASX higher by 1/5%. And something to watch out for going forward. We've got the RBA, the Reserve Bank here, expected to cut the cash rate by another 25 basis points down to a record 0.75%. This is other central banks around the world continue to ease. So that decision in just a few hours. Over in Japan, we do have the Nikkei stronger as well, higher by 0.8%. Today is, of course, the day that Japan's sales tax increases from 8% to 10% on most items. Japan's third quarter Tankan survey also came in a little bit better than expected earlier today. If we take a look at Korea, the Kospi now better by 0.5%. 1%. And this after we did have some rather disappointing data out of Korea for September. First off, the CPI fell into contractionary territory, now at -0.4%, although the finance ministry says Korea is not in deflation. Also, Korean exports slipped in September by a worse than expected 11.7% as South Korea continues to fight trade battles on a number of fronts. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Paul. All right, now here's an update on the impeachment inquiry that's happening in the United States against President Donald Trump. His personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has been subpoenaed by House Democrats to provide documents of his communication with Ukraine on Trump's behalf. Jody Schneider of Bloomberg News brings you the details in this report.
We're seeing not only Mr. Giuliani, but Attorney General Bill Barr and the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, being drawn more deeply into this impeachment inquiry as details of the administration's foreign contacts are becoming more clear. We're getting more details about that. Mr. Giuliani, as you note, has been subpoenaed. His records of any involvement in the Ukrainian matter have been subpoenaed by 3 House committees. House Intelligence, House Oversight, and the Foreign Affairs Committee. We're seeing Mr. Barr his contacts with foreign governments that he may have been asking them to help in terms of the Justice Department probe involved in the Mueller report, including his potential knowledge of a call that President Trump made to the Australian Prime Minister. That's being looked into, and we've now found out there's reporting by the Wall Street Journal that the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, was listening in on that July 25th phone call that is at the heart of the impeachment inquiry. That's the call in which President Trump asked the Ukrainian leader to help investigate Joe Biden, the former vice president, and his dealings in Ukraine. So we're seeing this spread on several levels to several key members of the administration, and of course, Mr. Giuliani, who is the president's personal lawyer.
And yet Congress is away on recess for the next 2 weeks. So how quickly are we expecting this impeachment inquiry to move?
Yes, even though Congress is on recess, they are still moving ahead. These committees are moving ahead in the meantime. That subpoena for records, emails, text messages, phone calls from Mr. Giuliani, they're moving ahead with that. They have given him a deadline of October 15th to provide that information. And we've been told that the Inspector General is moving forward in terms of getting materials to be able to try to conduct a hearing, a closed-door hearing with the whistleblower who had come forward with this information about that phone call, that July 25th phone call. So it looks like Congress is trying to move pretty quickly on this, certainly for this kind of probe. Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, has said that she wants to move expeditiously, but she wants to make sure that they get the right information. She, of course, was somebody who was reluctant to go ahead with an impeachment inquiry into President Trump, but then after that phone call, that July 25th phone call, she was pushed to do so, and it looks like the House is moving ahead fairly quickly. Now, of course, the Senate, which is Republican-controlled, will have to see what happens there, and if they are going to, how they're going to look at investigating these, doing these kinds of investigations in the Senate as well.
We'll keep you posted on all the updates with regard to that. But meanwhile, on the other side of the globe, celebrations are underway in Beijing for the 70th National Day in China. Just a short distance away, though, in Hong Kong, the mood is the polar opposite. Protesters have decided to undertake more marches today. Sophie Kamradinov, Bloomberg News, reports from Ground Zero on what Acting Chief Executive Matthew Cheung spoke about just a short while back and what the protesters have in store for the day.
Acting Chief Executive Matthew Cheung this morning, he vowed to continue dialogue with protesters as hundreds of guests watched the flag raising ceremony from indoors earlier this morning. He also spoke of China's support for the chief executive and the special administrative region to govern effectively. He also raised concern over the economic impact from 4 months of protests and highlighted that the administration seeks to use new thinking to address deep-rooted problems in the city, which we may hear from when the policy address is delivered by Carrie Lam later this month. And of course, we're counting down to the November 24th District Council elections, where 4.1 million registered voters will be able to use that as an avenue to express their frustration. And while Matthew Cheung delivered his speech, police were patrolling the surrounding area and 2 water cannons were on standby near the convention center on the Expo Drive. So far, though, only a small group of pro-democracy activists, they made their way here to this area. A more subdued event than unlike what we saw during the July 1st handover anniversary, where there were clashes between protesters and police.
So, Sophie, what are you hearing now on the ground? We've heard that there's some marches already happening in Wanchai. What's expected today?
Yeah, that was a small group that made their way from Wanchai here to the Hong Kong Convention Center, and other unauthorized rallies are planned for most to start later this afternoon, primarily around 6 districts where we've seen a lot of action over the past weekends across Hong Kong, Kowloon, and New Territories, with one of these earlier planned protests to happen in Sha Tin, where the Jockey Club is to still hold its National Day race around heightened security. And later this afternoon, protesters are still expected to gather in large numbers for this Civil Human Rights Front planned rally that was banned by the police, and that was upheld by authorities as well. And ahead of these anticipated protests, Yvonne and Selena, more MTR stations were announced closed, so that total is now 11 stations closed around the city, and several malls also being shut today, including the upscale luxury shopping center IFC in Central down that way.
Jessica Summers of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines now.
The Wall Street Journal says Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also took part in the phone call between President Trump and the Ukrainian counterpart that has prompted an impeachment inquiry. State Department officials haven't commented on Pompeo's role. Meantime, President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has been ordered to provide documents to the House Intelligence Committee over his communications with Ukraine. Australian PM Scott Morrison told President Trump he was ready to help shed light on matters under investigation in Washington. That's amid reports the White House sought his help in a Justice Department inquiry. The New York Times says Trump asked Morrison to help the Attorney General gather information that might discredit the Mueller investigation. And the British government has completed the draft text of a new Brexit deal and will send it to Brussels this week. Sources say the draft includes a proposal that would let the UK avoid the so-called backstop at the Irish border. One of the biggest sticking points in the Brexit negotiations has been the EU's insistence that Northern Ireland would have to remain part of the single market customs union. And Saudi Arabia's non-oil growth accelerated in the second quarter, a sign that the economy is surviving the austerity measures that followed the collapse of crude prices 5 years ago. Non-oil GDP expanded almost 3%, the fastest pace since 2015. Oil GDP, meanwhile, shrank due to production cuts as OPEC seeks to really stabilize prices, and that did cause overall economic growth to slow to 0.5%. And North Korea has used the UN General Assembly to decry the lack of progress in nuclear talks with the United States, saying the fall lies with Washington's political and military provocations. Ambassador Kim Song said that little movement has followed the first historic summit in Singapore, and that it's up to the U.S. to decide whether the talks will be a window of opportunity or a further crisis. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Jessica Summers. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn to the Indian markets now. Agam Vakil is here to set you up for the day's trade and also what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, I know that the markets are as hard to predict as the weather. It's raining outside right now. But what can you tell us at the start of trade?
We're just going by the SGX Nifty, Alex. It seems like we may have a positive session, but you never know because there are ways by which global indices can come and perhaps wreak havoc when it comes to the Indian markets. But for now, we're looking at a positive opening as far as the indications of the SGX Nifty futures go. Let's take a look at how we saw trade pan out yesterday, and there was a 0.33% cut yesterday for the indices, but sharper cuts for the broader market indices like the small cap and mid cap ones. As far as the banking index is concerned, again, we're looking at a lot of weakness. So it was essentially a day where you saw a lot of weakness in the broader markets. And there's more and more which is coming through about disregarding the top 10, 15 stocks by market capitalization. And if you consider the rest of the market, there is a lot of damage here. Of course, as far as ADRs are concerned, we're looking at a decline of anywhere between 2 to 3% across, as you can see on your screen there. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that one. Of course, Infosys and Wipro among two other stocks which are actually advancing in trade. Now, as far as fund flows are concerned, we once again saw FI sell a stock worth around 469 crores. On the other hand, DI is buying stock worth 505 crores on a net basis. Contributors wise, we did have HDFC Twins along with ICICI Bank and IndusInd Bank bear down on the index. Remember, it was a very, very weak day of trade for the entire financial sector yesterday. And essentially the reason why we did see so much weakness in the markets. But let's take a look at what the futures and options space is showing us, and there has been an increase in open interest, but what is really standing out is the Nifty banking open interest increase of as much as 37%. This is a matter of concern because there are more and more shorts in the bank Nifty futures which are looking towards selling pressure further. But move on and we talk about your open interest distribution. There isn't much to look at for now. And as I was suggesting that 11,500 should be sustained below that, there could be a little more writing. But let's take a look at the change in open interest, and that will give us a better picture about how the shift is panning out. And that's exactly what has come through. We've seen more writing around the 11,500 call. You're going to see a lot of resistance on the higher end, on the lower end we don't have too much to go for. But the WIX, India Volatility WIX index, they came off around 1.5% to around 15.9. Very surprising considering there is so much weakness in the markets. And as far as your put call ratio is concerned, that's also come off again on expected lines to around 1.11. In terms of stocks though, there are none in band, but we are keeping an eye on IDFC, First Bank, RBL Bank, Piramal Enterprises, HDFC Bank. As you can see, the top four movers as far as accumulation is concerned are from the financial space. Hexaware, of course, stood out towards longs. IT was a sector which was in the green yesterday. And in terms of stocks which saw unwinding, again, Manappuram Finance, Container Corp and Jubilant Foodworks. But on the whole, there certainly is a lot of weakness, Alex, and I wouldn't be surprised if the SGX Nifty turns towards the negative at some point in the day.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Agam. All right. Now, let's talk about the government and its borrowing plan. In fact, the government is sticking to its glide path on a fiscal deficit, which will require it to hit the 3.3% in the current financial year. It has maintained its borrowing plan for the current financial year, and Nikunj Ori gets us all the details that he's picked up on this.
India will maintain its borrowing plan for the remaining 6 months of the financial year amid concerns that the government would miss its fiscal deficit target after the surprise corporate tax reduction announced by the finance minister, which led to expectations that the government would borrow more from the market in the remaining 6 months of the current financial year. The government will borrow 2.68 lakh crore rupees through 17 weekly auctions in October to March. Out of these 17 weekly auctions, the government will borrow 16,000 crore rupees each through 15 weekly auctions and 14,000 crore rupees each through 2 weekly auctions under various maturity buckets. There's one more important update. Economic Affairs Secretary Mr. Tanu Chakravarti has said that at present the government intends only to raise money from the market through rupee-denominated bonds, signaling that the sovereign bond issuance announced in the Union budget may not go through. Economic Affairs Secretary has said that the government is still looking at the pros and cons of such an issuance, and a sovereign bond issuance needs a lot of deliberations on the price and the current market conditions, and the government is still looking at the structure and pros and cons of such an issuance before announcing any such issuance.
Let's now listen to what Economic Affairs Secretary Tanu Chakraborty told reporters with regard to the dollar sovereign bond issuance that has been the topic of much discussion ever since it was announced. Listen in.
Sovereign bond, that is the bonds, what you mean by the bonds to be raised in external currencies, are decided on the basis of the current price, the market appetite and the market conditions, and the related issue and the structuring of the bond itself. They need very careful calibrations and deliberations before one enters in the market. So the work on that is presently going on to work out the proper structures, look at various pros and cons, and it is a process which is long and would continue for some time.
So any hope that you get some sovereign bonds this year, sir? Can you see any borrowing during this fiscal?
For this year, all the borrowing of the government presently is in rupee-denominated bonds.
India's output for the 8 core sectors showed a degrowth for the first time in 4 years. Core sector output contracted 0.5% in the month of August. The degrowth was last seen in April of 2015. Among the 8 core sectors, coal production contracted 8.6% compared to last year. Crude oil production fell 5.4%, while natural gas production contracted 3.9%. Cement production was lower by 4.9% in August, while electricity generation too was down close to 3%. The 3 sectors that grew were in the positive were petroleum products, which grew 2.6%, fertilizers, which grew 2.9%, and steel production, which grew 5%. Somit Sarkar is here now to tell you all about the stocks in news. Good morning, Somit. What's on your list today?
Good morning, Alex. I'll start off with the Reliance Industries, where the company has said that Aramco has confirmed and reassured that the crude supplies for October will be maintained despite the attack that we had seen on Saudi Aramco's refinery. Now, as part of the deal, Saudi Aramco was supposed to supply as much as 5 lakh barrels per day of crude oil to Reliance Industries. Yesterday, Government of India has set the natural gas prices for the second half of financial year 2020 at around $3.23 per million British thermal unit. It is down by nearly 12.5%, while the prices for the difficult fills were set at $8.43, which was down nearly 10%. Now, this news is negative for ONGC, Oil India and GAIL India, while positive for ceramic, fertilizer and city gas distribution companies. Airline stocks would also remain in focus because Indian Oil Corporation has cut the ATF prices for the 5th consecutive month. Now, pan-India prices were cut by nearly 12% compared to last year to close to 66,600 rupees per kiloliter for October 2019, while however the prices were higher compared to last month by nearly 3.4%. Cadila Healthcare would also remain in focus because the company has sold its right, title and interest in Zypitamag to Medicure. Now, the company will receive an upfront payment of $5 million and a deferred payment of $2 million over the next 4 years. Now, Medicure had previously acquired US marketing rights, and with this profit sharing arrangement with Cadila, with this acquisition, Medicure retains all profits with full control of marketing and pricing, a negotiation for USA and the Canada market for this drug. Now, Macquarie in its note said that they were disappointed by the quantum of payout that the Cadila was supposed to receive by sale of this medicine. Huhtamaki would also remain focused because the company has entered into an agreement to acquire Mohan Mutha Politics flexible packaging business for around 80 crore rupees. Now, the company stated that this acquisition will allow the company to add manufacturing capacity in South India, and this acquisition will be funded by debt and is expected to close by December 2019. NBCC will also remain more in focus because they've signed a memorandum of understanding with government for development of National Sports University at Imphal for around 400 crore rupees. Lastly, 3 stocks that would remain in focus because of the key important bulk deals. Tata Communication, where Rekha Rakesh Jhunjhunwala has acquired nearly 0.7% stake, while Amansa Holding has sold close to 0.65% stake. Infibeam Avenues will also remain in focus because the promoter has sold close to 0.5% stake in the company. Lastly, Wheels India, where the promoter Titan Europe has sold 10% stake, while the buyers of this were ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund, Sundaram Finance Holdings and IDFC Sterling Value Fund buyers.
Thanks so much for that, Somit. Moving on to politics, Aaditya Thackeray, the elder son of Shiv Sena party chief Uddhav Thackeray, has said that he will contest the assembly elections in Maharashtra from the Worli constituency. He will become the first member of the Thackeray clan to ever contest an election. Take a look.
साक्षीनी सगळेच महापुरुष साक्षीनी माझ्या आजी माझ्या आजोबा यांच्या साक्षीनी मी निवडणूक लढवणार ही घोषणा करत आहे.
ये लिख के रखना, आदित्य जी ठाकरे इस महाराष्ट्र के मुख्यमंत्री बनेंगे.
Now to the political scene abroad, in fact to India's neighbor. Today marks the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Here's a look at how the future looks for President Xi and his country.
Well, first, I think we're probably seeing the middle of the Xi regime. So Xi wants to glorify himself and to say, you know, here I am at 70 years. I'm now inherited the Communist Party and I will take the country forward. Second is that the party's now survived almost as long as any Communist Party in history. Soviet Union survived 74 years. Next round, 75. Next big celebration will probably be 75 years. China will have surpassed the Soviet Union. Now we've got Xi, who has come in and said, okay, long enough. We've laid low long enough, right? It's not time to lay low. He personally doesn't want to lay low, right? I don't think that's part of his nature in any case. And he feels that China is now strong enough to make up for those 100 years of humiliation, which he talks about all the time, and to be a great power. And so he set this goal of national power. And I think that's part of what we'll see at the 70th anniversary.
All right, there's a lot more like that just on the website BloombergQuint.com. It's www.bloombergquint.com, so don't forget to check it out. Thanks so much for watching.